Imagine you are on a big plane flying high above the ocean. Suddenly, everything goes wrong. That was the scary idea people think about when they hear Flight 236. The name Flight 236 actually belongs to a real flight from long ago, and people remember it because it lost all power mid-air. But recently, during the Iran-USA war of 2026, aviation has become even more dangerous. Flights are being canceled, diverted, or delayed all over the Middle East because war affects the skies. That's why talking about this terrifying story makes sense now. First, let's understand the real Flight 236 story from history. Air Transat Flight 236 was a plane flying from Toronto to Lisbon in 2001. Midway over the Atlantic Ocean, the plane suddenly ran out of fuel because of a technical problem. Both engines shut down, and the plane became a powerless glider. There was no crash, just silence and fear. Passengers didn't know what would happen next, and the pilots had to work fast to save everyone. When both engines failed, the plane slowly started descending over the Atlantic. People on board must have been terrified seeing the engines stop and hearing unusual noises. The pilots didn't give up. They knew they had to glide the plane like a glider to reach land. It was a race against time, and every second felt like a lifetime for the passengers. The fear in the cabin must have been real. Nobody knew if the plane would make it. Captain Robert Pichet and his co-pilot made the bold decision to glide the plane toward the nearest land, the Azores Islands of Portugal. They had no engine power, and communication with air traffic control was intense. The fact that the plane stayed stable enough to glide for so long shocked everyone later. Pilots had to keep calm, find a place to land, and guide a giant Airbus like a sailplane. It was one of the most unusual flight recoveries ever. After many nerve-wracking minutes, the pilots reached the Azores, a group of islands in the middle of the ocean. They made a perfect emergency landing on a runway used by both military and civilian flights. Everyone on board survived, all 306 people. There were injuries, but no deaths. It was dubbed a miracle landing, and the plane got a nickname, the Azores Glider. That flight became legendary because of how rare and incredible it was. Pilots don't get many chances to glide a plane without engines, and to land it safely was almost unheard of. The story was featured in documentaries and books, and many aviation fans still talk about it as one of the great survival stories in flight history. Now let's bring this into 2026. The world in early 2026 is witnessing a major conflict involving the United States, Israel, and Iran that began at the end of February. This war has made flying in the region much more dangerous. Although Flight 236 from 2001 is not part of this war, the idea of a terrifying flight makes sense because airspace over the Middle East is now unstable. Because of ongoing airstrikes and attacks, many flights around the Gulf, Middle East, and nearby regions are being canceled or rerouted. Airlines worry about missiles, drones, and other threats in the sky. Even countries like Oman, Qatar, and the UAE have suspended flights on some routes. That means passengers are facing uncertainty, delays, and fear whenever they plan to fly, especially if they are going near conflict zones. Airlines are now issuing travel warnings. Some countries won't allow flights to cross certain airspace. Airports in the Gulf region have limited operations. People flying long distances now worry if their flight will take off, land safely, or even be allowed in the first place. This adds a modern twist to the idea of terrifying flights, not because of engine failure, but because of war. And it's not just war zones. In early February 2026, a Turkish Airlines flight with 236 people on board made an emergency landing in Kolkata after pilots noticed a possible engine fire shortly after takeoff from Kathmandu. The plane diverted safely and no one was hurt, but stories like this remind us how real and scary aviation emergencies can be. Imagine being on that Turkish flight. The captain announces engine fire soon after takeoff. Passengers feel anxiety, maybe panic. The crew and pilots are calm, but inside, people are scared. This shows that even when flights don't crash, the fear of danger in the air is real. In a war situation, that fear is even stronger because there are more unknown risks. War makes everything unpredictable. Even if pilots are trained and experienced, they can't control missiles, drones, or sudden airspace closures. Countries around Iran and the Gulf are seeing airspace restrictions, and airlines are constantly adjusting their flight paths to avoid danger zones. This makes flights longer, more expensive, and more stressful for passengers. If you ever find yourself flying in times of war or conflict, the most important thing is to stay informed. Keep track of airline announcements, check travel advisories, and always have a plan B. Airlines sometimes offer refunds or rebooking options when war affects flights. Staying calm and prepared helps more than panic ever could. The original Flight 236 was terrifying because the plane lost power over the ocean. The flights in 2026 are scary for different reasons: war, airspace danger, and uncertainty. But both cases remind us how fragile human life can feel when you are thousands of feet above ground, trusting machines and pilots to keep you safe. That's the true reason the phrase "terrifying flight" sticks in our minds. In the end, the story of Flight 236 shows both fear and hope. In 2001, fear turned into survival and calm. In 2026, fear comes from war and uncertainty, but people still adapt and find ways to fly safely. Pilots train for emergencies, airports learn to handle crises, and passengers learn to stay informed. Whether it's an engine failure or flying through tense skies, the human spirit always looks for ways to stay safe.